Good morning. My name is Richard Wexler, and this is Caring in America, the podcast for caregivers and care recipients. Folks, another special episode with the tables getting turned again. I'm about to introduce Steph again, and she's going to come on and kind of ask me some intriguing questions. And again, I hope that she's nice and they're not too hard. Are you there, Steph?
I am. Thank you for having me on again, Richard.
Sure. Thank you for quizzing me. So, what do you want to talk about today, ma'am?
So, I want to dig in more to the plan. Like, how do we start that conversation? This is something that my family just recently finally had our first official conversation, and I was able to kind of pull from topics from other podcast episodes, and that really helped. So, I really just kind of want more tools in my toolbox, but I know it can help other people as well. So, you talk about the fact that you and your wife did not plan. Let's start there. Why not?
Oh boy. Good question. I talk about the fact that I think we were the quote unquote normal couple, both working, trying to make a living, raising two small kids. As I've talked about, they were 11 and 7, so they weren't driving. They had a lot of activities outside of school and homework. I, you know, can I give you an honest answer of why we didn't plan? Probably not. I think that for whatever reason, and I've talked about this, I don't think I'm stupid. I don't think my wife is stupid. And we had four parents in their 80s. And I guess somewhere in the deep recesses of our mind, we thought they were okay. We'd go visit them, they'd go visit us, everything seemed fine, still driving, blah, blah, blah. Then all of a sudden, we start getting the phone calls that I've talked about. And I guess, was it too much trouble to plan? Did we, backing up and thinking about it, we probably didn't even really understand that we needed to plan. Like a lot of couples, and I've talked about this before, okay, it happens, and you just kind of make a left turn or a right turn or go straight and deal with it. And I don't think we even thought about what deal with it meant. It just, that's what you do. And again, being really naive, and this is almost 20 years ago, the summer of '05, when this all started. I don't think we were really thinking about the fact that, yeah, it gets hard, and yeah, it's going to affect our lives, and yeah, it's going to affect our two children's life. So I'm not probably giving you the best answer of why we didn't plan, but we didn't, and we paid for it. Does that kind of answer your question, ma'am?
Absolutely. And I think that brings up a good point of we don't know what we don't know. As we go through school at different grades, you learn different things, a curriculum, and probably across the United States, you probably have similar studies or milestones of what you learn. But after graduation, we don't learn how to age. We don't learn how to care for a loved one as they age. So it's almost like a education piece, which I love that this is your whole gig. What you're trying to do is to educate all of us out there on how to hopefully thrive while we age. So with that, on every episode again, it like surround planning. Why is it so important?
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you. And I know you're aware we're putting this foundation together that we're trying to kick off next year a plan to age. And that's going to revolve around two things: all the education and then all the resources and where you find them. But you're 100% correct. I mean, there's no class that I'm aware of, whether you're in grade school, middle school, high school, college, that really teaches this. And when I started doing this and realized I couldn't spell the word care 16, 17 years ago and started going out and educating people, I was like that guy just trying to get people A, to pay attention, and B, to learn something about why it is important. You know what happens, probably not in every family, but in a lot of families, the adult children make assumptions about their older loved ones and what they want and they need. And I've said this a lot. Assumption's a bad word, but that's what adult children do. And then in reverse, older loved ones make assumptions about their adult children and their ability and time to assist them. I've heard so many times an older mom will call her Betty. Oh, no problem. When something happens, my daughter and her husband, they'll be there to take care of me. And I've had those conversations with women named, I'm making this up, the name Betty, but women like that in that age group. And did you really have you talked to your kids? Do they know that you're just assuming that they're going to be there to take care of you when something happens? And I've had countless conversations with adult children who look at me and say something similar about, well, I know what they want and they're going to want this and so on. And really, I mean, have you really talked to your mom and dad or your grandparents? And I've talked about this too. This could be a close uncle, this could be a close aunt, someone that you've been close to since you were little, and all of a sudden they need help. That's part of why it's so important. Does that help?
Yes, I think that that is great, and it hits the nail on the head of why it is so important to have those conversations, and preferably before you're in that crisis mode of backtracking and figure out how did we get here. So with that in mind, is there any pointers or anything that you can give our listeners to help understand how to begin this conversation?
Wow, that's a great question. I've been asked that a lot when I've been out speaking, and I'll look at let's say the adult children in the audience, and the last thing you want to do is call up mom, call up dad, call up grandpa, whoever it may be, and say, guess what, we got to talk. And what type of response do you think you're going to get? It's not going to be positive. So, what I've found over the years and talking with other people in the elder care field, if a son, a daughter, a daughter in law, a son in law goes to mom, dad, whomever it may be, and says something like, Mom, Mary and I could use some help, or Mary and I could use some advice. What I've found and what other people in the field have found, most of the time, mom, dad, whomever it may be, is going to say, "Sure, Johnny, what do you need? How can we help you?" And then, I talked a few minutes ago about these assumptions, and I've even heard that an adult children will think, well, my sister Jane lives right down the street from where mom and dad live. We've moved 5 states away, and if something happens, Jane can take care of them. And that doesn't really work. So let's change this a little bit, and let's say this is the older loved one, the mom and dad, the grandparents, and it's equally as important for them to have what I call a family conversation with their adult children, or at least an adult child. And simply, if they don't live close, picking up the phone and saying something like, "Hey, Johnny, can dad and I have a conversation with you? We we have something on our mind and would love to talk to you." Most of the time, that adult child is not going to say no. They're going to say, "Sure. When are you talking about? What works?" And you come up with a date, and you come up with a time. It's a gentle entree into this conversation, Steph.
That is, yes, great advice with that. Um, Speaking for my family, and I'm sure we're like a lot of others, not everyone comes from the same background, or maybe not as proactive or willing to have this conversation. So if there's family members that you feel maybe should be involved in it, but object to being in that kind of intro conversation, do you have any advice for what to do in those types of situations?
Sure. Well, obviously, if there's one child, that's different. If there's multiple children, that's different as well. And one of the first things you're going to want to do before you approach mom, dad, grandparents, etc., is have a conversation with your siblings. So, you're looking for a couple things. Who's got the closest relationship with mom, dad? Who may be the alpha dog in the family? And it doesn't always have to be the alpha dog that's having this conversation. A lot of times it could be the middle child, it could be the youngest child. The family knows most likely who has the closest relationship with mom, dad, etc. And the last thing you want to do is pick up the phone, call them, have three or four brothers and sisters on the phone. They're going to feel beaten up. I mean, you guys are picking on me. So hopefully, to avoid maybe a family member that, I mean, because let me back up. Not all family members are good at this. Not all family members are fine having this type of conversation. I'm talking about the adult children. For some children, it's easier. For other children, it's more difficult. And chances are, if the one that finds this difficult is the one trying to have this conversation with mom, dad, etc., it's probably not going to go well. So you need to talk to your siblings. If there's multiple, you need to come to a decision who should have this conversation. Assuming, bad word, assuming everything goes well, at some point down the road, other adult children can get involved as well, but have that initial conversation with brothers and sisters. Does that help?
Yes, thank you for that. I feel that, so we're going through, my loved one that we're caring for right now is my dad. And fortunately, but unfortunately, we went through a similar situation with his dad having early onset Alzheimer's. And my dad comes from a large family, so he has 6 siblings.
Wow.
I have one. So for seeing how they interacted towards more end of life and as things progressed more, between his siblings, I think my sister and I have been able to kind of see that, how those relationships really changed between each other, between the siblings and the dad. Um, and I'm very fortunate that we have kind of become a united front in this situation. But I could just imagine that having more siblings involved, you have different relationships with your parents.
Sure.
So it's
Yep.
probably easier for us. So once you start kind of having that conversation with your siblings and figuring out who wants to start the conversation with mom and dad, what is the first subject that you would recommend somebody to talk about?
What you really want to do once you've started this family conversation, once you've reached out to mom, dad, these are the adult children reaching out. One of the first things you want to find out is, okay, as they age, where do they want to live? And there's a 99.9% chance they're going to say, well, right here in our home, the same home where we raised you. Okay, now you get that. Now you understand that. I mean, you're not communicating this to mom and dad. That could be difficult. If care comes, if there's a need for care and they're really demanding they stay at home, that can be difficult. And that's going to bring up other subjects. And the second piece of that same first conversation, mom, dad, God forbid if something were to happen and you needed care, what would you want? I mean, who would you want to care for you? And that's where you may hear, well, you, Johnny, or your sister, Jane. I mean, and again, is so you're taking all this in. You're not really replying right now, but now you know they want to stay at home. And the expectation is you and your wife, Jane and her husband, are going to be the ones to care for them. Those are really the first two subjects you want to start discussing.
So with those two pieces in mind, and this is kind of where we're at thinking for my dad right now. So this is very helpful for me too to have somebody to kind of brainstorm with that knows more of the ins and outs than what I would know. What other subjects might be between like point A of plan is to live at home, but a year from now they need care. What other subjects be tied into that we should consider?
Sure. And so that kind of walks into what really is going to be the next subject. Okay, mom, dad, I get you want to live at home, and your expectations are that we or my sister Jane can take care of you. I mean, you guys realize we live 3 states away. Jane lives about 400 miles away in a different part of the state. We would love to be able to take care of you, but that's probably going to be challenging. Jane and her husband work, Mary and I work, we have our kids. So that's going to be tough. So let's kind of look at this realistically. If you guys really want to stay at home, we're probably going to have to bring someone in. And my understanding is that's pretty expensive. So, I've never asked you guys what you have saved up and what you possibly could afford if we got into a care situation and God forbid it was both of you. But my understanding, it's not cheap. It's expensive. And then a lot of it depends on how many hours in a day you're looking for someone to come in. And God forbid something were to happen and you needed someone caring for you guys around the clock. Then there's some other options. I mean, if realistically Jane and I can't do this, we'd love to, but that's going to be pretty difficult. And I know you don't want to hear this, but then we'd probably have to talk about maybe you guys moving to a place like an assisted living where there are people there. There's care there. That isn't cheap either. And I know you don't want to hear this, but we're talking realistic scenarios, the way that can get paid for. And I know this is not going to come across great, but selling the family home. So I hope that helps, Steph. You want to start walking into what does care look? And I haven't even mentioned a price yet, but what does care cost? And as you know, and I know, it's not cheap.
I like the way that you have the adult children not necessarily take charge, but they have to in these situations, the goal would be that they would be the ones that would kind of prompt this conversation. And I feel, at least for my parents and my grandparents' generation, there's a lot of pride and independence. So feeling like you might be a burden to your children uh, might stop that from them from starting that conversation. So having ways to navigate this of saying, "Mom, Dad, I need help." I love just that quick like tagline almost of just keeping that in my mind of starting conversations like that so it's not putting a defense up. But I feel that yes, starting the conversation and having these little baby steps to have this plan started is going to help so much in the long run. Is there anything else that you can think of that you wanted to bring up today?
Sure. I mean, when you're so depending upon how this conversation is going, it may have ended after that first part about where they want to live and them needing care and so on and so forth. And this may then break into multiple conversations with multiple phone calls. At some point, you're going to need to understand if your older loved ones have done an estate plan. Do they have a will? Do they have a trust, which is necessary in almost all the states? If they don't, that is something that needs to be taken care of, whether they meet with someone. If it isn't that complex, there are sites where an estate plan can be put together online, but that's extremely important. I'm not going to get into all the legal issues, but you want to avoid a thing called probate. You want to be able to control the stuff that you've built and acquired in your lifetime. So, a conversation about whether they have an estate plan, if they don't, how are they going to get one? The next piece of that is the financial piece. So, maybe at this point, I've told the parents what care in the home's going to cost. You know, we're talking close to $40 an hour. What care at a community assisted living, we're talking an average of $5,000 a month around the country. So we've crossed that bridge, and we had hoped this took place many, many, many years before, but meeting with a financial planner or a financial advisor. Maybe mom and dad do have a decent amount of money. How is it arranged? Can they get their hands on that money? That's where meeting with an advisor or a planner would be so important. What's also important from this conversation is that Johnny the son and Jane the daughter, who are hopefully either participating and or hearing about this conversation, realize, you know what? At some point, you guys or your spouse is probably going to need care. And if that's many years down the line, and I'm talking 40 an hour now, and I'm talking 5,000 a month at an assisted living, what's it going to cost then? So we're kind of utilizing that conversation to hopefully wake up Johnny, wake up Jane. They're both working, their spouses are working, they're making money that they need to be sitting down with a financial planner or a financial advisor and not just talking about this R word called retirement, but talking about this little word called care.
Thank you. And I know we're coming close to running out of time here, but I just wanted to ask one more quick question and correct me if I'm wrong, but your goal with a plan to age, the website or the app that you're hoping to launch next year, is that going to almost have like a roadmap with these, I'll call them pit stops? And they might not, every pit stop or every piece of this puzzle might not fit each family's unique situation, but being able to think about the unknown and again, we don't know what we don't know. So there might be keywords or things that will stick with us, but we don't have to dive in and do all the research until it is closer to being needed. Is that kind of your plan for that?
Yes, ma'am. So we want the younger folks hopefully coming to this for the reasons I just talked about. Maybe they've already dealt with the care for mom or dad or grandparents, and they're realizing how difficult it was and how expensive it was. And they want to start planning. They need to understand what they in their 40s should be doing. They want to understand and start looking through if we ever need care, what are the resources that are out there? So, yes, different people at different points in their life, where with the older mom and dad, the older grandparents, maybe planning is going to be tough right now, even though we're going to educate them about that. And there still may be some things they can plan, like the estate plan, but then showing them, okay, you live here. How can we help you with resources in your area? So, yes, we're trying to help people at any stage in their life really understand what they should be doing from a planning perspective, but also what are the resources that are out there.
Thank you, Richard, again for letting me come on and just ask all of these questions. I feel it's so important to, I don't want to say keep, beating a dead horse, but it is so important to, rephrase these questions and one day it's going to click with a different person. So thank you again for letting me come on today.
Thank you, Steph. I really appreciate it. And if you want, if folks, like we always talk about, if you want to reach out to me, you have a question, you have a comment, you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, that email once again, eldered2023 at gmail.com. Reach out. We'll always get back to you. And as I've said many times, this happens. It's one older loved one. It's never going to be easier. But I truly believe, and I've seen it, if there is a plan, it will be easier. So, with that, I want to thank Steph again. And until we meet again, have yourself an awesome day.